So in today's session, we are going to discuss human respiratory system. So previously we have seen human digestive system and physiology of digestion we have finished. And in today's session, we are going to talk about human respiratory system. Students, you are aware of this human respiratory system you have studied in 10th standard. And here, those things we are going to discuss again when you come to 11th standard. So these things we are going to discuss in very much detail. Now let us begin our discussion. Human respiratory system. So this is the diagrammatic representation of human respiratory system. And human being respiratory system consists of certain components. What are the components which are found in human respiratory system if you see? So these are the components, students. Let me read out those components one by one. External nostrils. External nostrils, you can see external nostrils. Here this is nose open outside by means of small opening called external nostrils, right? So we'll discuss. Then these external nostrils open into nasal chamber. So nasal chamber you can see here, this is nasal chamber. So external nostrils open into what? Nasal chamber. So this is nasal chamber. And internal nares. Internal nares means internal nostrils. You can call even, you can use what? Nostrils also. So then, nasal chambers through internal nostrils open into what? Pharynx. Pharynx is popularly known as throat. You can see this portion is what? Pharynx. So this entire portion is what? Pharynx. And the pharynx again opens into what? On one side it opens into esophagus, on other side it opens into what? Larynx. So that is what you can see. Next part of the respiratory system is what? Larynx. And then larynx opens into what? Trachea. Trachea is also called windpipe. So these are the components of human respiratory system. Then you see bronchi. Trachea divides into bronchi. So here I have shown, you see left bronchus which enters left lung and right bronchus that enters right lung. Next, bronchi, bronchus singular, bronchi plural, right? So bronchi divides into bronchioles. Again, different kinds of bronchioles will be there. We will discuss in detail. Now, bronchi, bronchioles, and alveoli. These components you can find in lungs. So these are all you need to remember. Human respiratory system consists of certain components. What are those components? One by one, you have to remember. The external nostrils, nasal chambers, internal nostrils, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, right? And lungs. So these are the components we have to discuss in detail. Now let us try to understand one by one. As I told you just now, you can see on your screen. So this is what upper part of what human respiratory system. And those things we are going to discuss here in detail. Let us see one by one. External nostrils. What do you mean by external nostrils? You see this is nose, right? So nose, this is nose. Nose opens outside by means of what? One pair of openings, and this one pair of openings are called what? External nostrils. So one pair of external nostrils open out above the upper lips. You see above upper lips, nose opens outside by means of what? One pair of external nostrils. So all you need to remember, external nostrils are one pair of openings which are present at the tip of the nose, and they are located above upper lips. How simple it is, you see, it is very simple. Now you see these external nostrils leads to a nasal chamber. External nostrils, see here, somewhere here, they open into what? Nasal chamber through nasal passage. So this is something you need to remember. Now, anyhow, the external nostrils open into what? Nasal chamber. So second most important component of the respiratory system is what? Nasal chambers. Nasal chambers are separated. See again, this nasal chamber is there, one big chamber into which this external nostrils open, and this chamber is internally separated, right, into two compartments, and this separation is by what? Nasal septum. So that is what you need to remember, most important. Nasal chamber, external nostrils open into what? Nasal chambers, and nasal chambers are separated from each other by means of what? Nasal septum. So you can even see nasal septum in your nose. So two chambers are separated from each other by means of partition, vertical partition, and that partition is called nasal septum. And this nasal septum is made up of cartilage. So this is another important point you need to remember. How simple it is, you see. So far what we have seen, one, external nostrils we have seen. You understood what exact external nostrils. External nostrils open into what? Nasal chambers, right? Nasal chambers are separated from each other by means of nasal septum. Nasal septum is made up of what? Hyaline cartilage. It is not bony, it is cartilaginous. So how simple it is, you see, it's very simple. Now something important I would like to share with you as far as this nasal chamber is concerned, right? So this is what? Nasal chamber. This is nasal chamber, right? So this nasal chamber is functionally having some parts, dear students. So that is what I have mentioned, functional divisions of nasal chamber. So inside nasal chamber there are some what you can say regions, and those regions are those areas perform what? Some special functions. So what are those areas or what are those regions? Let us see in brief. Vestibular region, dear students, vestibular region, you see, let me make you understand this. Just imagine this is what? External nostrils. External nostril open into what? Nasal chamber. Just imagine one I am showing. Vestibular region. So this nasal chamber is divided into how many parts? Three parts or three regions. One is vestibular region. What does it mean? Vestibular region actually consists of what? Hair, and it is surrounded by skin, of course. Hair, you can see small hair I am showing here, and sebaceous glands. So these are the components of what? Vestibular part of nasal chamber. So second part of the nasal chamber is what? Respiratory region. Respiratory region. So here you can say respiratory region. RR stands for respiratory region. VR stands for what? Vestibular region. So this respiratory region is actually lined by pseudo stratified. Here you see I am writing here pseudo stratified ciliated columnar glandular epithelium. So this I have written as PSCCGE, pseudo stratified ciliated columnar glandular epithelium. So pseudo stratified ciliated columnar glandular epithelium is present. You know what is pseudo stratified epithelium? This epithelium is actually made up of what? Only one layer of cells, but it gives false appearance as it is made up of what? More than one layer of cells. So that kind of pseudo stratified ciliated columnar glandular epithelium you can find where? In respiratory region. Third region, you can see here, this is nasal chamber, just imagine. Third region is what? Olfactory region. In olfactory region, you will come across what? Neurosensory epithelium. Neurosensory epithelium. This is again epithelium, but modified epithelium. And this neurosensory epithelium, which is present in the olfactory region. OR stands for what? Olfactory region. And this neurosensory epithelium is also known as what? Schneiderian membrane. Schneiderian membrane. So we can detect the smell with the help of what? This neurosecretory epithelium. So with this, we have finished what? Nasal chamber we have finished, and so far we have seen only two components as far as human respiratory system is concerned. One is external nostrils, and second one is what? Nasal chambers we have finished, dear students. Now let us try to understand some other important aspects of human respiratory system. Now you can see on your screen internal nostrils. Here I have shown internal nostrils, right? So this is what? Nasal chamber. This nasal chamber already we have finished just now. Nasal chamber we have finished. Now internal nostrils. If you can see here, yeah, nasal chambers. This is nasal chamber over. Internal nostrils we are going to discuss now. These are what? External nostrils already we have discussed. So external nostrils, internal nostrils, external nostrils, nasal chambers we have discussed. Now let us try to understand what are exactly internal nostrils. You can clearly see this nasal chamber. Nasal chamber opens into pharynx. So this portion is what? Pharynx. Most important, you need to remember. Just I am highlighting this portion. You see this portion. This portion is what? This entire portion is what? Pharynx. You see here. Again, pharynx is subdivided into what? Nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. So you don't worry what exactly nasopharynx, what is oropharynx, what is laryngopharynx. I will explain here in detail. You don't worry. So nasal chamber, you can see here nasal chamber open into pharynx. See, nasal chamber is opening into pharynx by means of what? Small openings, and these small openings are called internal nares or internal nostrils. I hope you understand. So nasal chambers open into the pharynx right through a pair of internal nostrils, small openings, and they are called internal nostrils or internal nares, a portion of which is the common passage for both food and air. You see, as I told you, here pharynx is divided into how many parts? Pharynx in human being, pharynx is divided into three parts. One is nasopharynx. One is nasopharynx. You can see here nasopharynx. Second one is oropharynx. Oropharynx. And third one is what? Laryngopharynx. 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 So what is the speciality of this nasopharynx? So nasal chambers open into what? Part of the pharynx, and the part of the pharynx into which these nasal chambers open through internal nostrils is known as what? Nasopharynx. Nasopharynx means part of pharynx into which nasal chambers open through internal nostrils. That's all. This is what? Nasopharynx. You see, most important, this is pharynx we are discussing. So what is the specialty of pharynx? I told you pharynx is also called throat, and nasal chambers open into pharynx through what? Internal nostrils, right? And you know, this pharynx is divisible into how many parts? Three parts. NP, nasopharynx, OP, oropharynx, and LP, laryngopharynx. You should know the meaning of all these three terms. See, we are discussing human respiratory system. Previously, we have seen external nostrils, nasal chambers we have seen. Now we are discussing what? Internal nostrils. These are components of what? Human respiratory system. What are internal nostrils? Internal nostrils are small openings through nasal chambers open into what? Pharynx. Now pharynx, you see, next component of the human respiratory system is what? Pharynx. Pharynx is also known as throat. You can clearly see better here. So this is what? Pharynx. This is also called what? Throat, right? So what is the specialty of pharynx? If you ask me, pharynx acts as what? Common passage for both food and what? Air. And this pharynx is divisible into three parts. What are those three parts? Nasopharynx, oropharynx. OP means oropharynx. LP means what? Laryngopharynx. Here I have mentioned pharynx is divisible into three parts: oropharynx, nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. What is the specialty of these three, parts of pharynx? You should know what exactly nasopharynx is. You can clearly see nasopharynx is part of pharynx into which nasal chambers open through internal nostrils. So this is nasal chamber. I have shown here nasal chamber. This is what? Internal nostril. Somewhere here I have shown, you can see nasal chambers through internal nostrils open into what? Part of pharynx, and that part of pharynx is called nasopharynx. That's all. Next you see buccal cavity leads into pharynx, and the part of the pharynx into which buccal cavity opens is known as what? Or buccal cavity leads is known as what? Oropharynx. Name itself indicating naso means associated with nose, oro means associated with right mouth. You need to understand, it is very simple. Next, laryngopharynx, as name itself indicating, you see this part of the pharynx, you can clearly see better here. So part of pharynx, so this entire up to here, what? Pharynx only. So part of pharynx which opens into larynx. You see larynx here, you can find at the anterior end of what? Trachea. You will come across small box-like structure, and that box-like structure is called what? Larynx. The part of the pharynx, you can clearly see, I'm showing here what? Arrow marks. The part of the pharynx which open into what? This larynx is known as what? Laryngopharynx. Very simple. Or the part of the pharynx into which larynx opens by means of small slit-like see, we are discussing human respiratory system, and previously we have finished what? External nostrils, nasal chambers, internal nostrils we have finished, and pharynx. Those who joined late, so they can watch recording so that you can understand better. No problem. From here try to understand. So I will be explaining in detail. So pharynx is divisible into how many parts? Pharynx is divisible into three parts: nasopharynx, oropharynx, laryngopharynx. And this pharynx specialty is pharynx acts as common passage for both food and air. That thing you need to remember. And what is nasopharynx? I explained you. What is oropharynx? That also I explained you. What is laryngopharynx? That also I explained you in detail. You see the laryngopharynx opens into larynx. You can clearly see here I have shown laryngopharynx. Laryngopharynx open into what? Open into larynx. Larynx is also called what? Voice box. Voice box through an opening, and that opening is called glottis. Opening is called glottis. That glottis is covered by what? Glottis is covered by cartilaginous flap, and that cartilaginous flap is called what? Epiglottis. So here I have shown during swallowing, the glottis can be covered by an elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis. This epiglottis prevents the entry of food into the larynx. So those who joined late, you need not to panic. You see here I am showing beta. Just imagine what your teacher is showing here. This is what pharynx. Just imagine your teacher is showing this is pharynx, right? So P stands for pharynx. So here somewhere internal nostrils are there, right? So here somewhere what? This is buccal cavity. BC stands for buccal cavity. NC stands for nasal chamber. Nasal chambers, this is what beta? Internal nostril. Please do remember these things. Very simple it is, right? So in higher classes, when you join intermediate, I mean 11th standard, so we are going to see in again very much detail all these things. Basic things I'm sharing with you better so that you can understand. Nasal chamber, this is nasal chamber that opens into what? Pharynx through internal nostrils, and the part of the pharynx into which this nasal chamber through internal nostrils open is known as what? Nasopharynx. This part of pharynx is called what? Nasopharynx. P is pharynx. Part of pharynx is nasopharynx. Why nasopharynx? Because in this part of the pharynx, nasal chambers open through internal nostrils. Now you can see one more thing. This is buccal cavity. Buccal cavity again leads into part of pharynx or not? Yes, this part of the pharynx into which buccal cavity opens is called what? Oropharynx. What? Oropharynx. So in this way, air, right, enters the pharynx. Air enters the pharynx through internal nostrils, and food also enters the pharynx. Water also enters the pharynx. What? Through buccal cavity. I hope you understand. That is why we can call pharynx as common passage for both food and air. So as far as third part, laryngopharynx is concerned, you can see this is what? Voice box larynx. Just imagine this is voice box, just simple voice box or larynx, and you see behind what? This larynx opens into what? Trachea or windpipe. Trachea or windpipe. This is trachea or windpipe. So you see here same pharynx. This is part of pharynx that is opening into what? Voice box, and that is also opening into what? Esophagus. That is also called what? Food pipe. Esophagus is called food pipe. Trachea is called what? Windpipe. So this part of the right larynx, at the anterior end of the larynx, there is an opening. That opening is called glottis. That opening is called glottis. Now you tell the part of pharynx opens into larynx through glottis is called what? Laryngopharynx. LP. Right? The part of pharynx which opens into what? Larynx through glottis is known as what? Laryngopharynx. So this is very, very important. I hope everybody understood. I hope everybody quite comfortable with this. So that is what I have explained. Now you see this food and air pass through what? This pharynx. Food makes its way into what? Esophagus. Esophagus will carry food to the stomach. That is food pipe. And you see, whenever we swallow, right? Whenever we drink water, whenever we swallow any food material, during swallowing, what happens? This glottis is covered by one lid-like structure, cartilaginous structure, right? So that cartilaginous structure helps in closing what? Glottis, and thus it prevents what? Entry of water and food into the trachea or respiratory tract. So I hope all of you understood this. Now, larynx. Another important component of the human respiratory system is larynx. Now you can clearly see on your screen. So this is larynx, right? So far what we have seen as far as human respiratory system is concerned, those who joined late, right? So you can watch recording afterwards. First one, the external nostrils, then nasal chambers, then internal nostrils, then pharynx. In pharynx, we have seen three parts: oropharynx, nasopharynx, and laryngopharynx. Now you see one more component. We are going to discuss fifth component of the respiratory system, that is larynx. Larynx is cartilaginous box. Sir, where is larynx? If you ask me, better here you can see this is entire respiratory system. You can see nasal cavity. Nasal cavity is nothing but what? Nasal chamber, right? So this is pharynx, right? So pharynx is divisible into three parts. I told you, right? So nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. You can say this is oropharynx. This is what? Nasopharynx. This is what? Laryngopharynx. It is very simple. Nothing is there. How simple it is, you see. And here this is what? Larynx. Larynx is also called voice box. It is cartilaginous structure. Larynx is larger in males. So you can find larynx, voice box in males as well as in females. But in case of males, this larynx is somewhat larger, and this in females larynx is somewhat smaller. And see, this larynx is formed of 9 cartilaginous pieces. As I told you, this is cartilaginous box, right? So completely this larynx is made up of what? Cartilaginous pieces, right? Cartilaginous pieces are cartilages. And what are those 9 cartilages? If you ask me, you can see here I have shown single thyroid cartilage. Where do you find thyroid cartilage? You can see here I have shown in this diagram thyroid cartilage. I have encircled one thyroid cartilage, largest C-shaped cartilage. This is the largest cartilage piece of cartilage in the entire larynx, right? Most important. Second one, you see cricoid cartilage. One thyroid cartilage, one cricoid cartilage, one epiglottis. You can see here epiglottis. So thyroid cartilage I explained you. Then you see cricoid cartilage, you can clearly see, right? And then epiglottis. So these are single cartilages. You need to remember epiglottis. It is, yes, is missing epiglottis, right? Then arytenoid cartilage 2. How many? 2 arytenoid cartilages are there. Important, you need to remember 2 arytenoid cartilages are there. You cannot see in this diagram. In next diagram, all will be shown. Next, 2 corniculate cartilages are there. How many? 2 arytenoid cartilages and 2 corniculate cartilages and 2 cuneiform cartilages. So 3 cartilages are paired cartilages. What are those paired cartilages? If you ask me, arytenoid cartilage, corniculate cartilage, cuneiform cartilage. These 3 are paired cartilages, right? So you can see here, right? And 3 cartilages which I have shown here, they are what? Unpaired. Remaining, 3 arytenoid cartilage, corniculate cartilage, cuneiform cartilage. These are paired cartilages. The larynx has 2 pairs of vocal cords. The larynx is having how many? 2 pairs of vocal cords. Anterior pair of vocal cord are called false vocal cords, whereas posterior pair is called true vocal cords, and these two vocal cords helps in production of sound, right? Most important. So that is why this larynx is also called what? Sound box or voice box. You can say larynx is also called what? Voice box. It helps in production of voice or sound, so therefore it is called what? Voice box. I hope you understand. So with this we have finished what? One more component of the human respiratory system, that is larynx. Larynx we have finished here, students. You need to remember. Now in this diagram you can see all cartilages, right? Corniculate cartilage, thyroid cartilage. Thyroid cartilage is also called what? Adam's apple. Most important, thyroid cartilage is called Adam's apple. Then you see arytenoid cartilage, right? Cricoid cartilage, you can see. All these cartilages you can clearly see here in this image. So at least if you remember what is larynx, larynx is bony or cartilaginous, so that would be enough. And you see this larynx helps in production of sound, so therefore it is called what? Sound box or voice box. Another important thing, larynx opens into what? Trachea. Better, now you can clearly see here, your teacher is showing something, right? So this part is what? So this upper part of this trachea is what? Cartilage, larynx. This is upper part of the trachea is larynx, and larynx is having what? Cricoid cartilage, you can see here, and thyroid cartilage. By seeing these names, thyroid cartilage and cricoid cartilage, you can identify this structure as what? Larynx. You see how simple it is. This larynx opens into what? Trachea, or trachea opens into what? Larynx, vice versa. You can see larynx opens into, come on, pharynx opens into larynx by means of epiglottis. Larynx opens into what? Trachea. So that is what I have shown, no problem in this diagram. Now it's turn to discuss what? Trachea. What is trachea? Students, trachea is also known as windpipe. Trachea is also known as windpipe. Previously, while discussing digestive system, we have seen food pipe. We have seen food pipe. Esophagus is known as what? Food pipe. So here, trachea is known as windpipe, right? So through windpipe, what happens? Atmospheric air reaches what? Alveoli, or enters our lungs. So trachea length, if you see, students, length of the trachea is 10 to 12 centimeters. Length of the trachea is 10 to 12 centimeters. See, length of the trachea, how much? Length of the trachea is 10 to 12 centimeters. You can see I have shown here. So this is the length of the trachea. You can clearly see, right? And this trachea is lined by 16 to 20 C-shaped cartilaginous rings. So like this, they are incomplete. Cartilaginous rings are incomplete. And for your kind information, you see, these are incomplete on the dorsal side. Dorsal side means what? Back side, right? So ventrally, these are complete, but dorsally, these are not complete. Ventrally, right? So there is no protection to the trachea. Only skin will be there above it. So therefore, cartilaginous rings are complete on ventral side. On dorsal side, right, cartilaginous rings are incomplete. And behind trachea, you will find what? Esophagus will be there, beta. What? Esophagus will be there, food pipe will be there, right? So this is just transverse section I have shown. This is what? Trachea, and this is what? Esophagus. This is esophagus. This is very important. You need to remember this. Now question raises, what is the significance of these C-shaped cartilaginous rings? The significance of C-shaped cartilaginous rings is they prevent the collapse of trachea. So if these cartilaginous rings are not present, what would have happened? You see this trachea collapse. Trachea collapse. So these C-shaped cartilaginous rings internally, they are present. On which side they are complete, on which side they are incomplete, I explained you. And these C-shaped cartilaginous rings prevent what? Collapse of the trachea. And they always keep the trachea open so that atmospheric air passes through the trachea and ultimately it reaches what? Our alveoli, where exchange of gases take place, or where exchange of gases occurs. Very simple, beta. All these things are very, very simple, and I hope you understand. So this is something most important you need to remember. Again, you can clearly see, as I have shown, trachea is straight tube. So you can clearly see here, trachea is straight tube or not. Yes, it is a straight tube extending up to the mid thoracic cavity. You see here, trachea, pharynx opens, laryngopharynx exactly. Pharynx opens into what? Larynx through glottis, and the glottis continues what you can say, larynx continues as what? Trachea, and the trachea passes through what? Neck beta, and that runs up to the middle of the thoracic cavity. Thoracic cavity means that runs exactly up to middle of the chest region, right? So that is what. So trachea is a straight tube extending up to mid thoracic cavity, which divides at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra. Most important it is. So you see, on our dorsal side, you will come across what? Backbone. Backbone will be there. That backbone is also called what? Vertebral column. In that backbone beta, you will come across how many? Around 26 vertebrae are there. Like this, around how many? 26 vertebrae are there. In neck region, you will come across what? 6 cervical vertebrae. So your teacher is showing here, you see. And in thoracic region, you will come across around 12 thoracic vertebrae in chest region, backside, and in abdominal region, you will come across what? In you see here, sacral vertebrae, 5 sacral vertebrae will be there, right? So here, first you can write what? L, lumbar vertebrae, 5 will be there, and below lumbar vertebrae in lower abdomen, right? So all you need to remember, 5 sacral vertebrae fuse with each other to form what? Sacrum. What? Sacrum, you need to remember. And last 4 vertebrae fuse with each other to form what? Coccyx or tailbone. Coccyx or tailbone. So what I'm telling you, you see this trachea beta extends up to what? 5th thoracic vertebra. 5th thoracic vertebra, and at the level of 5th thoracic vertebra, this trachea divides into 2 branches, right? They are called left bronchus and right bronchus. Left and right primary bronchi. Bronchi is plural. Bronchi is plural, right? And bronchus is singular. And bronchus is singular. Bronchi is plural and bronchus is singular. You see here, bronchus is shown. Left main stem bronchus. Left bronchus. This is what? Right bronchus. If you want to show these two together, so then you can call them as what? Left and right primary bronchi, you can call them. That's all. So with this, we have finished what? Trachea. And I hope you understood this trachea perfectly without any problem. Very few points you have to remember. First point, trachea is also called windpipe. Trachea is straight tube, right? Its length is 10 to 12 centimeter. Internally, trachea is lined by what? C-shaped cartilaginous rings, which prevent the collapse of the trachea. They keep the trachea always open beta. You need to remember that. And this trachea is what? Straight tube that will extend up to the mid of the thoracic cavity, and at the 5th thoracic vertebra, I have even shown here diagrammatic representation also I have given, so that you can exactly understand what is happening. So it divides in 2 branches, left and right primary bronchi. Here you can clearly see beta, left and right bronchi I have shown here. Now let us try to understand some other aspects, students. Human respiratory system we are discussing, right? You can see this is what trachea and its branches I have shown. So here 2 terms, right? While discussing human respiratory system, you will come across 2 terms, students. One is bronchial tree. So short form is BT, we can call it. And another one is beta respiratory tree. What? Respiratory tree. That is called what? RT. RT stands for respiratory tree. BT stands for what? Bronchial tree. what does it mean, right? So what is bronchial tree? Why we are calling it tree, right? Just now you can see just I have played this, right? So you can see when this is upside down, it looks like what? Trina. So therefore it is called what? Bronchial tree. So this is just stem branches, right? But it is upside down. So therefore it is called what? Bronchial tree. So what exactly bronchial tree and how it differs from that of respiratory tree? Let me explain you. When trachea enters thoracic cavity, you see this is trachea. This is entering what? Thoracic cavity. You see this is thoracic cavity, right? When trachea enters thoracic cavity, divides into two branches, right? So it dividing into two branches, you see here, and these two branches are called what? Primary bronchus, right? You need to understand all these things. Primary bronchi, two branches together called primary bronchi. Branches of primary bronchus up to terminal bronchioles make what? Bronchial tree. Most important, it is very simple. Trachea, when enters thoracic chamber, it divides into two primary bronchi, right? Trachea, primary bronchi, up to what? Terminal bronchioles constitute what? Bronchial tree. Next, you see terminal bronchioles divide to form respiratory bronchioles, and respiratory bronchioles and branches of respiratory bronchioles make what? Respiratory tree. So this terminology you need to remember. So again, one more time I am explaining. If you have any difficulty in understanding in first case, in second case you can very easily understand. You can see here bronchial tree. So what are the components of this? Is what? Respiratory tree. So this is one more easiest method to make you understand, right? What is bronchial tree? What are the components of bronchial tree? And what are the components of respiratory tree? You can see here entire, this respiratory passage I have shown over here, right? So this is larynx. This is right thyroid cartilage. You guys are aware. This is trachea, right? So here color, different colors I used, you see, so that I can distinguish, right? So different parts. So this blue color is what? Primary bronchus. This yellow color is what? Secondary bronchus. And this green color is tertiary bronchi, plural, right? And this again one more color, somewhat, right? So light reddish color, that is what? Quaternary or fourth order of bronchi. No problem, you don't worry. You see here trachea. Yeah, this is trachea. Primary bronchus singular, bronchi plural. Yes, beta. Trachea, primary bronchus. Secondary bronchus is also known as what? Lobar bronchus. Leave it. This word is not much important. Trachea, primary bronchus, secondary bronchus, tertiary bronchus, right? And again intrapulmonary bronchioles, and you see terminal bronchioles. What? Terminal bronchioles. All these components constitute what? Bronchial tree. Bronchial tree includes what? Trachea, primary bronchus, secondary bronchus, tertiary bronchus, interpulmonary bronchioles, and terminal bronchioles. So otherwise, previously what I explained you, beta, bronchial tree constitutes what? From trachea up to terminal bronchioles. You see here started from trachea up to terminal bronchioles. This respiratory passage is known as what? Bronchial tree. Then respiratory tree means what? So respiratory tree means, you see, respiratory bronchioles. These arise from what? Terminal bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles are part of what? Bronchial tree. Respiratory bronchioles, from respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts arise, right? So alveolar ducts have what? One space called what? Atria, right? Into atria, alveolar sac opens, alveoli. So all these constitute what? Respiratory tree. The reason behind calling it as what? Respiratory tree is exchange of gases takes place in respiratory tree part, right? So with this we have finished what? bronchial tree and respiratory tree we have finished, and I hope you enjoyed, students. Now you see human respiratory system we are discussing. You can clearly see here each bronchi undergoes what? Repeated division. So this is something very, very important you need to remember, students. Each bronchi undergoes what? Repeated division. You can see to form secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, right? Of course, quaternary bronchi is also there, tertiary bronchi and bronchioles, ending up in very thin terminal bronchioles, right? So this is something important. Trachea, primary bronchi, secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, and initial bronchioles are supported by C-shaped cartilaginous rings or incomplete cartilaginous rings. So I told you C-shaped cartilaginous rings are found in trachea. So not only in trachea, C-shaped cartilaginous rings you can find which prevent collapse of the trachea. They are also present in what? They are also present in secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, right? Even in what? Up to initial bronchioles, these C-shaped cartilaginous rings are present which prevent what? Collapse. So this is something extra you need to remember. And ultimately you can clearly see this is terminal bronchiole, right? So you may be having what? Doubt in your mind, where is terminal bronchiole? You can clearly see terminal bronchiole previously, right? I have shown all these things previously. So you can see here in this diagram clearly terminal bronchiole, right? So here you can see terminal bronchiole. So this is terminal bronchiole, right? So this is terminal bronchiole. Up to terminal bronchioles, you can find what? Up to initial bronchioles, not up to terminal bronchioles. Up to initial bronchioles, you can find what? C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Again, you see terminal bronchioles gives rise to what? See, initial bronchiole. Just imagine this is initial bronchiole. Initial bronchiole giving rise to what? Initial bronchiole. This is the initial bronchiole. IB stands for initial bronchiole. That gives rise to terminal bronchiole, right? And this terminal bronchiole, from terminal bronchiole, what? Some branches arise. They are called respiratory bronchioles. Beta. Respiratory bronchioles form what? Alveolar ducts, right? Alveolar ducts form what? Alveolar ducts open, right? I mean, alveolar ducts ultimately having what? Bunch of alveoli. That is what I have shown here. Each terminal bronchiole, you can see each terminal bronchiole. Actually, this is formed from what? This initial bronchiole, right? Terminal bronchiole gives rise to a number of very thin. You can clearly see a number of very thin, irregularly walled, vascularized bag-like structures called alveoli. You can see here. So it is directly given, no problem. So you can, again, if you want to drag it, you can drag it. So you see here, initial bronchioles divide to form terminal bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles form what? Alveolar respiratory bronchioles. Respiratory bronchioles form alveolar ducts, and alveolar ducts will be having what? Bunch of alveoli. That's all. With this, we have finished what, dear students? We have finished what? Respiratory passage we have finished. Now let us try to understand. So this is, you can clearly see on your screen, right? So this is human respiratory system, and in this human respiratory system, right, I have shown what? Lungs. Lungs are magnified here, right? So you can see two lungs. We are having two lungs in thoracic cavity. Rest of the things, right? So larynx, trachea, epiglottis, everything we have finished, dear students. Now you need to understand what? Lungs also. You see the branching network of bronchi. You know, I told you primary bronchus, trachea divides into what? Here you go back and try to recall. This is T. T stands for what? Trachea. Trachea divides into what? Primary bronchi, right? So primary bronchi divides into what? Secondary bronchi. Getting secondary bronchi, again they divide into what? Tertiary bronchi. Tertiary bronchi, again they divide into what? Quaternary bronchi. Again they divide into what? Initial bronchioles. They divide into what? Again, right? Terminal bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles again divide into what? Right? Come on. Respiratory bronchioles. You see, terminal bronchioles, respiratory bronchioles, right? Respiratory bronchioles again divide into what? Respiratory ducts, right? Respiratory duct ultimately, right? I mean, they again divide into what? Alveolar ducts. Alveolar ducts open. I mean, they ultimately bear what? Cluster of alveoli. So this is what our respiratory passage beta you need to remember. So very, very simple. Nothing is there. Now inside lung, what you can find? Inside lung, you can find all these things. Trachea is present outside the lung. Your teacher has shown you, try to understand. Trachea is present outside the lung, right? So this left bronchus enters what? Left lung, and right bronchus enters what? Right lung. This side right lung will be there, no problem. I'll be showing subsequently. So what exactly enters lungs? It is primary bronchus, secondary bronchus, or tertiary bronchus, or trachea. It is primary bronchus or plural primary bronchi enters lungs. No problem, no issue. The branching network of bronchi. I hope this is what branching network of bronchi your teacher has shown. You can clearly see this is branching network of bronchi, and bronchioles and alveoli comprise lungs. You see better now. Branching network of what? Here you can clearly see branching network of bronchi. Bronchi means plural. That may be primary bronchi, secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, quaternary bronchi. You need to remember branching network of bronchi plus bronchioles plus alveoli. These three components, right, comprise what? Lungs. Means they are present inside the lungs. In other words, we have two lungs. You can see we human beings are having two lungs, one pair of lungs, which are covered by double layered pleura. We have two lungs, and those lungs are covered by what? Double layered pleura. You see here pleural membranes I have shown, outer parietal pleura and inner visceral pleura. Inner visceral pleura, most important, right? And with the pleural fluid between them. So in between these outer parietal pleura and inner visceral pleura, there is a space, and that space is called pleural cavity. Right here I am showing, and that pleural cavity is filled with what? Fluid, right? Pleural fluid. Pleural fluid is present in between what? These two pleural membranes, outer parietal pleura and inner visceral pleura. In the pleural cavity, pleural fluid is present. It reduces friction. It reduces so lungs we are discussing in human respiratory system, right? So inside lung, what exactly you can find? So we have one pair of lungs or two lungs, left and right lung, right? So that will be shown in next slide. You don't worry. What exactly you can find inside the lungs beta? I told you, I explained you everything so far, right? Branching network of bronchi. What is branching network of bronchi? Here I have shown this trachea divides into primary bronchi, then primary bronchi divides into secondary bronchi, then secondary bronchi divides into tertiary bronchi, they divide into quaternary bronchi, they divide into initial bronchioles, they divide into right terminal bronchioles, then respiratory bronchioles, then right alveolar ducts, and then what? Alveoli. So all these comprise what? Lungs. So that is why branching network of bronchi, bronchioles, and alveoli comprise lungs. We have two lungs. They are covered by what? Double layered pleura, right? Or pleura means pleuron, singular, pleura, plural. Double layered means outer parietal layer will be there. Here I have shown two layers: outer parietal pleura and inner visceral pleura. Outer parietal pleura and inner visceral pleura, that you need to remember. In between these two layers, just imagine. So here I am showing these are two layers, right? So double layered pleura, this is outer parietal pleura is there, and inner what? Visceral pleura is there. So these two together called what? Pleural membranes. What? Pleural membranes you need to remember. And in between these two pleural membranes, here I have shown yellow color, right? So you can clearly see. And in between these two membranes, you can find what? pleural cavity is there. What? Pleural cavity, which is filled with what? Pleural fluid, right? Filled with pleural fluid, and this fluid reduces friction on the lung surface, right? It's very simple, very simple. Then you see outer pleural membrane is in close contact with the thoracic lining. Outer pleural membrane, right? So parietal pleura is in close contact with what? Thoracic lining, whereas inner pleural membrane, that is visceral pleura, right, lies in close contact with the lung surface. So very simple it is. On lung surface you can find visceral pleura. On thoracic, internally thoracic cavity is lined by what? Parietal pleura, right? And in between these two pleura, there is a space called pleural cavity, which is filled with pleural fluid, right? And that pleural fluid reduces what? Friction, most important, on lung surface. So with this we have finished what? Human respiratory system. Even lungs also we have finished, dear students. Now one more thing I would like to share with you. So this is the diagrammatic representation of what? Human lungs. You can clearly see human lungs. So we have, I told you, one pair of lungs, right? So right lung you can see here. So this is what? Right lung. So RT stands for here right lung. And you see this is what? Left lung. This is what? Left lung. You need to understand. Right lung is larger. You can clearly see in this diagram. Right lung is larger. Right lung is having 3 lobes. Beta. Right lung is having 3 lobes. You can clearly see what are those 3 lobes. You see here, this is one lobe. This is what? Another lobe. You can see here another lobe, right? Right lower lobe this is, and this is right middle lobe, right? So right middle lobe you can clearly see, and right upper lobe. So, right. So you see, this is something very important, basic thing. This is, you guys are aware, I think you might have been taught by your teacher in school days. In human, right in human being, right lung is larger, point to be noted. And another important thing is, this right lung is having 3 lobes. Even names I have shown here. Right upper lobe will be there, right middle lobe will be there, and right lower lobe will be there. All these things in very detail we are going to discuss in our 11th standard, right? So next you see left lung is having only 2 lobes, beta, right? So what are those 2 lobes? Left upper lobe and left lower lobe, right? So then only 2 lobes are there. You can see here, left lung is having 2 lobes, right? And what are those 2 lobes? I told you. Another specialty of the left lung is having cardiac notch. What? Cardiac notch. So where is cardiac notch? If you ask me, you see here there is a concavity or depression, right? So that depression, right, is called what? Cardiac notch. So here only heart is present. Here only heart is present. You see I'm showing heart, right? So here heart is present, heart is located, right? So in between 2 lungs there is a space, and that space is called mediastinum, right? And the left lung is having what? Notch on its surface. That notch is called cardiac notch, right? So here lung is actually located. So generally that is why we say that heart is located in between 2 lungs, and that too heart is somewhat left side, we say, because heart is lying in close association with what? Left lung, because there is a space called, there is a depression called cardiac notch, right? So where it will be found? Which one? Heart. So obviously it will be present in between 2 lungs in a space called mediastinum, but it will be very much close to what? Left lung, right? With this we have finished what? Even position of heart also we have finished. And another important thing I would like to share with you, in human respiratory, right, system, you will come across what? 2 parts. What are those 2 parts? You see conducting part is there. Conducting part starts from what? External nostrils, and it will be up to what? Terminal bronchioles. This part constitute what? Conducting part. It will be just carrying what? Atmospheric oxygen. That's it. I mean atmospheric air. And as far as alveoli and their ducts, alveolar ducts, you can say, these are involved in what? A respiratory exchange of gases. So therefore, this is called what? Respiratory part.